Take back control was Boris Johnson's rallying call in the Brexit referendum so that we, as he said, can unleash the potential of this great country out of the customs union, setting our own tariffs, doing our own trade deals. But how's that going? The OBR judged that leaving the UK's single market and customs unions would reduce our GDP by around £115 billion. So have we smashed through that figure in our post-Brexit deals? And if not, why not? The Minister for the Indo-Pacific has headed to Australia, where a new UK trade deal is set to be ratified. But just how much is that going to help the Brexit-shaped trade hole? Our economics editor, Ben Chew, is at the Newsnight wall.
Kirsty, the Minister for the Indo-Pacific, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, is travelling to Australia, and it's roughly a year since Ms Trevelyan, when she was the UK's International Trade Secretary, concluded the UK-Australia trade deal. Now, that deal has since been criticised by the former Environment Secretary and veteran Brexiteer George Eustice for being a bad deal for UK farmers, raising tough questions about the orientation and impact of our post-Brexit trade policy. So let's take a look at the state of play on those trade deals, which were, of course, once touted as one of the great potential economic benefits of the UK leaving the EU. You may remember that when Liz Truss was Trade Secretary in 2020, she seems to be announcing a new trade deal every other week with nations ranging from Mexico to Singapore to Canada to Turkey. But these 69-odd deals were all rollovers of free trade deals which the UK had with these countries by virtue of its EU membership, rather than new ones. It was an achievement to secure them. Some doubted they could all be rolled over by the time the UK left the EU. Yet the achievement was in enabling UK firms to stand still rather than get more access to foreign markets. But we have concluded some new trade deals, as well as the Australia deal. There's one with New Zealand and a deal with Japan, which adds to the previous EU one in some respects. So what's the overall economic impact of those? Well, let's use estimates from the Department for Trade's own published impact assessments. The Australia deal is judged to add around 0.08% to UK GDP, or around £2.3 billion. The Japan deal around 0.07%, or £1.5 billion. The New Zealand deal 0.03%, or around £800 million. This is all certainly worth having, but remember the context of Brexit, the UK leaving the EU single market and customs union. The Office of Budget Responsibility judges this will reduce long-run UK GDP by 4%, around £115 billion. And as you can see, those new trade deals don't come close to offsetting that damage. But there could be other deals too, couldn't there? We're in the process of negotiating a free trade deal with India, the world's fastest growing economy. And although it's been put on the back burner, we were told a new US trade deal would be a great post-Brexit prize. But look at the higher end estimates of how much even these deals would add to long-run UK GDP. For the India deal, it's 0.22% of GDP, or £6.2 billion. For a US deal, it's 0.16% of GDP, or £3.4 billion, the green bar there. So still far from compensating for the EU trade hit. And remember, this is using estimates of the government's own economists.
I don't think there's any evidence that signing trade deals with these other countries around the world than Europe has anything more than a rather small effect. First, they're a long way away, and we know that the effect of trade deals decays over distance. Secondly, the deals we're signing are very shallow compared with the sort of deep integration, deep relationship that we had with Europe. So overall, some of them are nice to have. I don't want to say, look, stop doing this, but I think most of us did find a surprising and could even use stronger words than that, the claims that were made about them. It's not the transformative thing that we had been led to hope for.
Given this economic context and the concerns about the adverse impact of these trade deals on specific UK sectors like farming, perhaps it's not surprising the government's focus seems to have shifted away recently from striking new global deals towards making existing trade with our European neighbours rather smoother. Kirsty.
Ben, thank you. Well, joining me now is Professor Martina Lawless from the Economic and Social Research Institute and Graham Gudgeon, the Centre for Business Research at the University of Cambridge. Good evening. Thank you both very much for joining us. First of all, Dr. Gudgeon, did you imagine 3 new small deals is where we'd be now, or did you genuinely think that actually we'd have more trade deals underway at least, if not ready to be ratified?
No, I thought we're pretty well where we are, really. It takes time to do this. I think the important thing to bear in mind here is that trade deals are a long game. If you take India, for instance, a small amount of trade now because they have such high tariffs. But in 20 or 30 years, the Indian economy may be almost as big as the entire EU economy. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership that we're about to join probably will sign up in January. Very fast-growing part of the world, includes much of the Commonwealth, by the way, or part of the old Commonwealth at least.
So you're quite optimistic. I just wonder, because when all the rhetoric was take back control, do trade deals wherever, and it seems that perhaps even 20 years, if that was what it would take, would be rather a long time, a time which we don't have when it's talking about growth and rebuilding our economy.
Well, the future does come around. Look, it's important to get a foot in the door here, and things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Perhaps there are more security implications in that than economic implications. But as a country now, we're free to negotiate these things, and we are negotiating them.
But does it matter? Sorry, I just wanted to clarify something. Does it matter if we don't replace the 4% GDP from our European allies, as we were saying, as Ben was saying at the end of his piece? It may be that we go for a closer relationship with them sooner rather than later. But does it matter if we don't replace that?
Look, that 4% figure is thrown about all over the place. It's usually ascribed to the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, but the OBR does no calculations of this sort. It merely quotes an average of others. Yeah. And a lot of these others have got pretty poor forecasting.
Well, let me put that to Martina. Let me put that to Martina Lawless. These figures simply don't add up.
Well, the work we've done on the UK's trade since it left the European Union have been that trade has fallen by about 20% in both directions, compared to the level that it should be at if it had grown in line with other countries in the EU and their international trade. Now, the UK trade, it has grown since it left the European single market as the global economy has bounced back from COVID. But the point is that it's grown at a much slower rate than countries that remained in the EU. So it seems that Brexit has slowed down not just the UK's trade with the EU, but also possibly that it's had impacts beyond that on the UK's trade with the rest of the world as well.
So when Dr. Gudgeon is talking about the Trans-Pacific and the rise of India of next 20, 30 years, do you think that's going to be really too late to kick in for a substantial change to the trade relationship, the trade balance that the UK will have?
But 20, 30 years is kind of a very, very long-term horizon. And if you look at global trade, the point out there in the piece was that trade is normally with your nearest neighbours. Distance is a very, very big driver. Even with all of the technology available now, the goods have to be often physically shipped. And distance even matters for services trade as well, often being in the same time zone, and cultural links are also picked up by distance. So distance is a very important, and moving away from trading relationships with a very large market right on your doorstep does have economic implications. So,
Dr. Gudgeon, do you think, as Ben Chu said, and we mentioned a little earlier, that actually the transformation will come in the relationship between the UK and the EU, and there will be closer links again? Is that the future?
No, I don't think so. The future is with the faster growing parts of the world. The EU proportion of our trade has been declining for 25 years now, whereas the trade with Eastern Asia has been growing faster. So it's a natural thing to do to try and get into bed with those fast-growing countries, and that's exactly what we are doing. And distance is becoming less and less important. Martina's point is often repeated by economists, but it's less and less true. Transport costs become lower and lower. More and more trade is done electronically, service trade. So places like India are going to be very important in the long run. But it's a difficult nut to crack. It'll take time. The Indians are famous for their protectionism.
So do you think you should rush?
But we're getting there.
Because the criticism, the George Eustace criticism was that you don't put deadlines on deals because that creates a bad deal. Would you agree with that, Martina Lawless?
I think that's true. International evidence on how long trade deals take to negotiate show that they can take several years, kind of an average of something like 7 years. And generally, the fastest trade deals are done where there's a big imbalance. A very small country will make a quick deal with a large country to get access to its market. So doing a deal very quickly is often a sign of a bit of an imbalance of power in the relationships. Countries that are both big trading blocs, going into lots and lots of detail about individual products and individual levels of service integration, that takes a long time to get through.
Thank you both very much.
Putting a deadline on it. Yeah.
Bad idea. Thank you very much, indeed, both of you. Well, earlier tonight, the USA fought